Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and HKU edX's Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. Today's episode is a little different from what we normally do. We'll be looking at the ways technology, particularly computers, and more specifically, artificial intelligence, can either raise the human condition and help us achieve our highest goals and ideals, or, as some would say, just be uncaring, unreasoning, and possibly even psychopathic hindrances. In our initial spotlight segment, we'll be discussing a recently written article by legal marketing maven Patrick Dransfield in the UAE on AI and human intelligence, called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. Following that, we'll chat with financial crime risk specialist Nigel Morris-Cotterill on his latest article for LinkedIn entitled Computers Are Mechanized Psychopaths. In it, he goes on to flesh out how computers are, particularly with an eye towards AI, are unreasoning and, quite frankly, uncaring. But first, Patrick Dransfield is a principal at Clearway Communications and a business development manager at Muane's International Specialized Consultants in the UAE. He also holds a master's degree in Chinese history, politics, and anthropology from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and a bachelor's degree with joint honors in English and history of art from Leeds University. He is a senior business executive in the field of legal business development, and also a qualified trainer, author, and photographer. Currently based in Abu Dhabi, the UAE's capital, he's the co-founder of Managing Partners Club, an international by invitation only group of senior lawyers across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. His career has been a broad one, and it includes having previously been the Asia Pacific marketing director for international law firms like Shearman and Sterling and White and Case, as well as being the managing director for Asia Law and Practice, the Asia publisher of the International Financial Law Review, and a board member of the Hong Kong-based subsidiary Euromoney Jersey Limited. And with that, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
From what I know about your background, the years we've interacted, you're not a techie, nor am I. You don't have a STEM background, science, technology, engineering, or math background. So what compelled you to write such a piece, other than the fact that AI is the dish du jour? Everyone's talking about it right now.
Thank you, AJ. I guess a number of factors converged. I just finished reading Karen Armstrong's epic, The Great Transformation, which is the spiritual history of the human race, no less. It took me a year. It took her longer, I suspect. I recently completed my second novel, The Inner Circle Wu Xing, which is a fictionalized account of the Northern Song genius and discovery of the binary sequence of the I Ching Xiaoyang. And I was asked to participate in the first Middle East Legal Innovation Forum in Dubai, organized by Andrew Bauer. And the theme of that was AI in legal business. And I've always wanted to write an article on the topic since 2016, when we hosted an Innovation in Law forum in Hong Kong, so that I could quote the poem that you've alluded to, actually, which I'm going to do. It's by my favorite poet and writer, one of my favorite poets and writers, Richard Brautigan. And I'll read it because I think it's kind of pertinent. All watched over by machines of loving grace. I like to think it has to be of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. So a convergence of circumstances that made me think about ancient human knowledge and intelligence and the manifest cultural differences between the East and the West. Just to go back to Karen Armstrong for a moment, she quotes one of the most ancient of the Jewish prophets, who we know simply as P, And P's terminology for love is that love is meant to be helpful, loyal, and involves the giving of practical support to our neighbors. And today, everyone is our neighbor. I think there's a great deal of fear, anger, and egotism in the discourse about anything to do with human progress right now. And that also applies especially to AI.
It's clear to me. It's clear to me that the human condition clearly concerns you, and you make reference to the major religions of the world. And maybe I'm seeing things that don't exist, but we do see parallels sometimes to things that even in earlier writings that apply to the modern world. For example, you speak in your piece. You spoke of uh, the major faiths emphasize that if people were to re-educate themselves, it would enhance their humanity. I can't help but see parallels between that and what we're increasingly hearing people say to workers, which is you need to retool, you need to reskill, you need to come up to speed on AI. Is that something you discerned as well?
Yeah, absolutely, AJ. I remember in 2016, again, the time when we were doing the legal innovation event in Hong Kong. I spent some time and also did a seminar for my colleagues, if you like, in business development and marketing. And I've been on this hobby horse for a while, so I think they're pretty tired of it. But I was talking precisely about human skills being very, very important because at the time in 2016, I passed around a press release and I said, what do you think about this press release? And people made one or two comments, but actually the whole thing had been generated by AI, and that was over 7 or 8 years ago. And I said, look, guys, this is going to eat your lunch. And unless you're going to be able to help partners and lawyers in the law firms that we work for actually generate business through being better salespeople, then we should really just get out of the way. And that view, which wasn't received terribly well at the time, has been proved right, actually, because there's a company called Intap. And I think most of the people who are related to law in one way or another will be familiar with that because that's the meter running for how you're billing your clients. But they also do a lot of research, and some of the research that they found, they actually spoke to over 800 partners and firms, and then through that research put them into different categories. And there's 5 different categories. And the one that generates the most business and is the most profitable for law firms is what they call the activator lawyer. Now, that activator lawyer is somebody who goes out and creates a large network of contacts, some of them clients, some of them potential clients. But more importantly, she's somebody who will share those contacts very generously. And this has been proved to be the best formula at this stage for a time when clients are becoming less loyal. And there's statistics on this. So clients, you could probably depend on a major client sticking with you around about 70% of the time. 6 or 7 years ago, it's now gone down to 50% and it's declining. So clients have got other choices. They've got AI to consider. They've got their own in-house teams. So having a wide net of people is very important, and learning the skills to be able to do that is really important. And those are human skills. AI can't do that.
It's interesting you talk about activator lawyers because every society has its connectors. Every society needs its connectors, and I think generally you'll tend to find that those societies where connectors are the most, just my opinion, those societies where connectors are the most generous tend to be the most positive, the most upbeat, where people uplift each other. They tend to be more productive. They tend to be more prosperous. Simply put, they tend to be happier, more functional, and there's something to be said for that. But let me come back to you. Let's talk about you. Given your particular profession, I mean, and same with myself. We're in, or my producer Pross, we're kind of in the legal profession, but we're not quite practicing. We're support staff to the broader mission of the legal profession. With that in mind, what sparked your interest in AI?
Well, let me wind back a minute, and before we dive into AI, I'd like to talk about human intelligence. And this is something during COVID, when I first arrived in London in February 2020, the only place I could go was the School of Oriental and African Studies library. Nobody else wanted to see me coming from Hong Kong. This was before the big wave. And so I spent a lot of time looking at origins. And I looked at the Greeks, and then I looked at the Chinese origins and began to sort of piece together in my own mind the difference between the West and the East. So before we jump into AI, I think we really need to think about human intelligence. And so what the article attempts to look through is what about
You're
human
not very
intelligence.
sanguine about the state of Western intelligence, I see.
Well, I don't know. I guess, I mean, that's statistically shown, and that actually in the West our cognitive skills are actually going down. Those sort of statistics aren't available, I don't think, for China. But so basically with human intelligence, I do think it is.
But people in the West are going to say, okay, fine. If we're so stupid, how come China's still a developing country?
So let's just wind back to what human intelligence actually is before we jump into that one, because we can then pass together why the developments are likely and are already quite different. And that is that human intelligence, in my view, is wrapped up in our idea of the self. And from the West, we have the Abrahamic tradition, which is we are the product of a interactive God. And I quote Milton, which is a great privilege for me in the essay, because he defines what that means for Adam and what it means in terms of our concept of the self. And so AI, through this prism of the idea that we're an individual created by and in the image of a God, means that it could even either be heaven or hell. And when you read most of the discourses on AI, you've actually got the Richard Brautigan view, which I think Steve Jobs would have probably subscribed to, and a lot of Silicon Valley comes from the West Coast hippie stuff, if you like, in the old days, that it's going to be loving, graceful machines. Or you have Peter Thiel, who took anthropology, which is a discipline I've also studied, from the French. He looked at this and looked at tribes through that prism of in Africa who just wanted to show off to their own 150 people. So he used the worst aspects of our narcissistic selves as a meter through which he could make investments. So, there's those two dichotomies. But if you look at the Chinese view, that's actually really quite different. And, basically the Chinese concept of the universe is that it had a supreme mover, but that wasn't an interactive God. It was just a sort of force which created yin and yang. And from that, everything else, the 100,000 things, the stuff that, the universe is made of. And human beings are just stuff, just like everybody and everything else. And what's the conclusion to that? Well, AI is developing in China as an open source product. So DeepSeek is the most famous one, but there are going to be more, and they're open source. And the China kind of, I guess, secret source, if you like, or super development has been a manufacturing superpower, has been very much proven in domestic dominance, in shipbuilding, electric cars, solar panels. We're seeing that now being exported. And AI, I think, will be part of that, will be one of those superpowers.
I agree. And I don't think you can separate, as Pat Buchanan said in one of his books, In the Death of the West, that you can't separate R&D from manufacturing, that from the record player came the CD player, that R&D is inexplicably intertwined with manufacturing. And that's an edge I don't think people appreciate China has. But years ago, when you said to your colleagues, you need to keep an eye on this, I'm assuming there was a reference to AI. You need to keep an eye on this or else it's going to eat your lunch, is what you said, I think, to your colleagues some years ago. So with that in mind, what are the implications of AI on the legal profession?
Well, that's a bigger question. And I'd probably need to spend a bit more time thinking about that. But I think basically the legal profession in the West, at least, is still metered by this billable hour, and that is still a dominant measure of payment, and that kind of depends upon private practice lawyers being continuing to be inefficient. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of resistance. There will be, a superficial adoption of AI, and I think the real generation that are going to feel the pain in the medium term are going to be the younger generation who are trying to get a foothold in the industry. So clients are still prepared to pay for the human intelligence of people with a lot of experience who can save them either from going to jail or make them billions of dollars. And that comes from, what Daniel Kleinman would call slow thinking, this experience based on maybe 30, 40 years of practice, where in your first half an hour, you can orient a client to the best result that they're likely to get. But actually, the profession does all the stuff that AI could probably do in 5 years or even shorter. And that's going to put pressure on a younger generation trying to come in and learn from these partners in the firms. And clients are going to get a little bit frustrated, I think. And then, where the profession goes from there, I really don't know. It's a problem for many, many years. I mean, there's been far smarter people than me, kind of saying the billable hour is going to kill everybody and it's going to die, but it hasn't. So I don't know where that's going.
What's been good for them since 1600 is good for them now. Yeah.
I guess that's right.
Yeah. So what would you say is the central thesis of your article? What's the core observation or conclusion?
Okay, well, I think I kind of iterated some of that a little bit earlier, but it's that if we're at this stage, at least, artificial intelligence is dependent upon human intelligence. And generally, I think I'm not saying West is worse or better than the East, they're just different. I think generally, very little time is spent talking about human intelligence. So that's the crucial thesis of the article, is to define what human intelligence is, then pass that into a dichotomy, perhaps a false dichotomy, I'm not sure, but to show how the concept of the self in the West is very different from the concept of the self in the East. And so for China, people consider themselves as part of society, not necessarily as individuals. And I think this is shown out by the way that, the West is going to...
Isn't that a cliche, though? I mean, that was true when I was growing up, but I mean, there's a strong individualistic streak amongst the post-80s generation, as you're seeing with the lie flat movement in China.
Well, yeah, I mean, evidenced by all the TikTok and all the selfie photographs that one sees, etc. But I think these cultural traits go back a very, very long way. And if you ask Chinese people on certain points, they will tend to agree, at least on the surface. So I think there is genuinely a difference in outlook. And I think it's reflected in the language. I mean, if you look at the word Ren, basically this means benevolence, it means scholar, it means sage, it means wise person. But it's actually the character or the radical on the left for person, human, and then the radical on the right for society or two. And this goes very fundamentally down to, I think, Chinese society and how it works, even to this day. And that's 4,000 or 5,000 years or even longer of history, which doesn't disappear in a generation. The West, obviously, we're probably a bit more familiar with that development. And, if you look at the way that AI is beginning to be kind of divvied up, if you like, I mean, you've got monopolistic type of companies developing, where Bezos with AWS, Elon Musk with XAI, and Sam Altman with Chat GPT. These are supposed to be silos owned and hugely valuable to individuals. So I think that still plays. I don't think it's entirely a cliche. Although when one tries to generalize, it's a good accusation. I mean, I'm glad you're keeping me honest.
Well, I mean, it's like if you look at these things, the more you try to superimpose ideological templates on individual behavior, it falls apart. For example, we look at someone like Hemingway. He was, by his own admission, a man of the left, but what he partook in manly activities like hunting and drinking and gambling and boxing and the type of things we tend to associate with men on the right these days. So, but again, there's individual behavior and then there's archetypes. The two don't necessarily always fit. But I want to come to something you said in your piece, and I quote, "I may be wrong, but the fraught ethical discussions that dominate the future of AI in the West is probably not shared in Chinese society. AI is most likely considered to simply be accepted as a tool like any other." And that's interesting because in the West you've got this whole Judeo-Christian notion, the Abrahamic guilt of no, AI must not be allowed to take on a life of its own. That's blasphemous. Whereas in China, it's a completely amoral consideration, and they'll do whatever they need to gain a decisive edge in it. And that may be one instance where the West's values are holding it back. Another position of the Indian government is AI must not be allowed to take on the life of its own. And in the time we've got left, any closing thoughts, Patrick?
Well, I think that trying to contain 1.4 billion people is a pretty stupid thing to try and do. And the Tao Te Ching teaches us that any force that you push in one direction, and I'm talking, I think, fairly obviously about North America with this one, you're likely to get the equal or even, the very opposite. So I think, to think through what you're saying there is that, having been in Shenzhen recently and having kind of been going to southern China especially, but also China generally for quite a long time, I remember going to Guangzhou in about 2018, and it was a Saturday, and there was about 250 in-house lawyers in a conference room working out and talking about and discussing being on the grey list related to, being banned from exporting to the States. And it wasn't considered to be an aggressive act. It was just one of those things that needed to be worked out. And my colleague recently observed to me and on a call that actually in China, the situation is quite calm related to the tariff situation. It's a discussion, it's a force that needs to be considered. So I don't think necessarily, there is the same amount of anger and angst in this discussion on AI or anything else in China as we would perhaps imagine it if it was a Western situation. That's just my observation. I'm sure there's people who will have a different view.
And I guess we'll have to leave it there. I know it's an ongoing conversation, and one will be.
Well, I can end on a joke if you like.
Sure.
Okay, so as you know, I'm in Abu Dhabi, so the joke has got an Arabic flavor to it, if you like. So a guy goes into one of the kind of junk shops which Abu Dhabi has, and he goes to the back of the shop, and of course he finds a lamp, and so he rubs the lamp, and the genie appears. A big blue genie, and so our guy says, the genie says, "You have 3 wishes," and our guy says, "Okay, well, the first wish is, I'd like all the lawyers in the world to disappear." So the genie snaps his fingers and says, done. And then he starts walking out the door. And our guy says, "But what about my other 2 wishes?" And the genie says, "Sue me."
I can just envisage the reaction you get in legal circles with that one.
Okay. Well, thank you, AJ. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, Patrick. And we'll be right back. And we're back. In the second part of today's program, we'll be chatting with financial crime risk specialist Nigel Morris-Cotterill on his latest article for LinkedIn entitled Computers Are Mechanized Psychopaths. It's quite a thought-provoking read. A little bit about Nigel first. He was previously a solicitor in London, and over the course of his career, he dealt with a wide range of matters, including contracts, property, company law, litigation, international trade, criminal law, IP, family law, and, of course, financial services compliance. In 1994, he brought all of those areas to bear on what was then a new field, financial crime risk and compliance, and as a strategist, he identifies trends long before they become fashionable and talked about. Nigel is the author of How Not to Be a Money Launderer, which in 1996 described all the areas that would, in some cases decades later, become topics for international groups and regulators to prioritize. He also authored the only book on understanding suspicion in financial crime. He's also written a book for families and others to help to start discussions about online safety and fraud for young people and the elderly. Additionally, Nigel provides training and consultancy services, though even he admits to becoming jaded by the prevalence of superficiality and a lack of attention to the fundamentals. His experiences with technology began in earnest in the 1980s, and since then he's advised caution over the fashion of so-called artificial intelligence, frequently demonstrating its failures in the simplest of tasks. Nigel, thank you so much for coming back.
Hey Jay, it's great to speak to you again.
So first off, why such... and again, going back to the title, so that there's no ambiguity as to what I'm saying. Computers are mechanized psychopaths, and that can be found on LinkedIn under Nigel's name. Why such an incendiary clickbaity title?
It's not clickbait. It's designed to make people pay attention to the fact that we are living in a world where computers are increasingly being used to make decisions, but they have no concept of the effect that they're having on people's lives. So computers they meet all the definitions of psychopaths. You know, that's the fact of the situation. The definition of a psychopath, according to psychology today.
Psychopathy is a condition characterized by the absence of empathy and the blunting of other affective states. Callousness, detachment, and a lack of empathy enable psychopaths to be highly manipulative. But is that not the fault of their creators? They're those that wrote the algorithms, those that created the machines to begin with. Some might say this is a matter of semantics, but I mean, if we're going to apportion blame, shouldn't it be laid at the doorstep of their creators?
It should be laid at the doorstep of those people who tell you it's capable of doing these things and it's not. Computers are mechanical. They are binary. They can only do or not do. It's yes or no. It's on or off. They don't have, even if you talk about fuzzy logic is merely saying, we haven't made a decision yet. So it's not, we have to understand that computers are not capable of thinking. They are not capable of interpreting. They are not capable of doing anything unless they have been told what to do and how to do it. A machine is just a box in the corner until it gets instructions. So we have to understand the limitation of what the computers can do, even with those instructions. And we have a problem, which is that people are trying to convince us that machines can be empathetic, that machines can interpret what is being said, that they can react in ways which are human-like. The fact is, they are technologically incapable of doing that. And unless you've got someone who is going to create an incredibly detailed, incredibly in-depth, impossible to calculate how many layers deep system, then the limits are always going to be met by what the computer can do. And it cannot understand. If, for example, somebody makes an insult, now it might be an insult to person A, but it's a joke to person B. And I'm from the north of England. We insult people the whole time. It's the basis of our humour. And we know
but that good-natured ribbing, as you and I well know down south, doesn't fly as well.
Exactly. And it especially doesn't fly in California. And the problem we have is that the decisions that are being made as to what is acceptable are being made by people who are promoting a particular ideology, a particular way of thinking, and they are not taking account of the fact that there's 8,000 million people on this planet, and 7.9 thousand million of them probably disagree with the decisions that are being made.
So we're all prisoners of the norms and mores of the SoCal tech bubble?
Those, and they contract to make it, yes. I mean, the end result is that we are seeing a logical progression of wokeism where it is now taken to a binary decision-making process, because that's all computers can do, that where it's being said, if somebody says this, that is automatically hate speech. There's no differentiation. It doesn't say, well, if this is really bad, it's hate speech. But for the vast majority of people, it's just people being a bit, it's a minor insult. It's not hating at all. And we have another problem, which is the term hate. We know what hate is. Hate is what people do when they want to go and kill somebody. It's not saying to somebody, I don't like the way you dress. And yet that is the interpretation that is being placed on this. And the mechanized systems, the computerized systems, the algorithmic systems are being designed to say, if you shame somebody for the way they dress or the way they look, that's hate speech. It's a million miles away from hate.
I was struck by, let's come back to your article a second, because I was struck by the opening where you're sitting in an office in the early 80s, and they wanted you to see firsthand what they deal with clients, and you had a shrieking customer whose boss was getting violent with a computer, and there you imparted a lesson that tech companies 4 decades on from the early days of personal computing had yet to learn, which was computers don't care about you. I mean, and aside from the frustrations we all had with Windows 95, I think that some people get that, but I guess what they're wondering is, what does that mean in practical terms? Because if you say computers aren't capable of the thought, then okay, fine. But then why are so many people freaking out about AI? I mean, again, people are wondering, what does this mean to me on a practical level? Why should I be concerned about the deleterious, detrimental aspects of it if they're not capable of thought?
Because every day I see dozens of articles, posts, and here on the radio and the TV, that artificial intelligence is designed to do something intelligent. We are being convinced by a world driven by salespeople that, or salespeople and over effervescent technologists, that this stuff is capable of doing things which it is not capable of doing. And so ultimately, many people believe it. And the fact is, because they believe it, when it doesn't work, they get upset about it.
So they've been sold a bill of goods as to what AI can handle, and when it doesn't meet those expectations, but that's typical sales puffery, is it not? That's typical product oversell, which I guess all salespeople are guilty of, and I guess the tech industry is no different.
Yes, but we're now in a position where we're combining that with a medium of distributing that message, which is itself ultra convincing. In the 1990s, I wrote a paper that was presented at York University and also University of Malaysia, which was explaining that people will believe anything they read on a computer screen because we are conditioned to do that. And it's just the latest of technologies that we've seen, going back to, scratching the number of sheep going through a gate on a block of soft mud. Technology creates a form of authority in what people are reading. And so we know that people believe the most utter nonsense from the far right, the far left, and various groups in between in politics because it's on a computer screen. There's always this presumption that they, in inverted commas, will prevent utter lies reaching your screen. Well, there is no they. And we know that it's not in the interests of many of the technology companies, and I include Google, Yahoo, Meta, and Twitter. It is not in their interests to filter out all the lies. And The irony is that if we go back to the idea of this computerized stuff, making these decisions over what is inappropriate, the irony is they're trying to use technology to filter out the lies, but they're not. But it's not capable of doing what they're trying to do. Maybe in 5 years it will, but as it is at the moment, it doesn't have. There is not the capacity. There isn't the data set. There isn't the question set, and you don't need to use ChatGPT or something to create that data set or question set. You need to talk to people in the pub, because it's real people that will tell you what is insulting, what is not as insulting, what really makes people worried, what they think, well, that person's just a bit of an idiot, I'll discount them. So the idea that what we're seeing is censorship driven by people who don't feel for the societies that they're purporting to serve. Quote, community standards basically means 20 people sitting in a room in California, half of them stoned out of their mind and the other half thinking, is it time for lunch yet?
What I like about your article is you get into the dangers of the homogenization of language and the use of language in a globally culturally diverse world leads to errors of judgment that become enshrined in computerized routines. And then we come to, as you were saying, the small group of people who become the arbiters of good taste and as to what is acceptable language and their own interpretations, which can often lead to division and discrimination, and rather than alleviating it. Is it fair to say then that if systems as they exist now are not capable of ferreting out the lies which they claim to want to do, then that they're looking for people who use certain terms, certain verbiage, certain types of language, and in a sense engaging in a modern techno witch hunt?
I think what they're doing is we're only seeing what people have done for a long time, but they've done it with humans who have a degree of discretion. And so we all know that historically, if we saw foul language in a book, that it had been a positive decision to allow that foul language to appear, and that somebody somewhere will have considered, should that foul language have been allowed?
Either because they agreed with it or because they wanted us to see the degree of hate that one time existed.
Exactly, because the reality is that foul language does have its place. It really does. But its place is not... I've just been watching the most recent series of Bosch on Amazon Prime. And the frequency and the offensiveness of the language in that is mind-blowing. In fact, to the point where it distracts from what is being said. And sometimes there's an obscene word thrown in the middle of a sentence which has absolutely no purpose whatsoever. It doesn't even shock because you're hearing it every 20 seconds or thereabouts in some cases. So we know that humans are attempting to push the boundaries of what is acceptable, and those are not being stopped by other people or by editors or by regulators or by technology. And yet if you put a bad word like idiot in LinkedIn, LinkedIn's technology will say to you, do you really want to say that? Because we banned people from using that word. You try it. You type idiot into a post and a warning pops up to say, are you really sure you want to say this? And if we look at Google, my company was banned or threatened with being banned from Google because we had a Google ad whatever they're called, adverts, because we had an article that compared American and English. And in that article, it talked about faggots. Now, let's be absolutely plain. In England, a faggot is a meatball. Or it's a bundle of sticks.
Or a cigarette.
Or a cigarette. Well, no, it's a fag as a cigarette, not a faggot.
Yeah, fags.
But yes. Now, Google's machinery and people who commented on the article for Google's attention all complained that the article was offensive, when what in fact it was doing was demonstrating that there is a problem in trying to homogenize language, and English and American are not the same. So here's where we have a serious problem. I mean, this was what, 8 or 9 years ago, and it hasn't been resolved, and it cannot be resolved because English and American are fundamentally different. So I'm afraid that this idea of saying we are going to create a community policy in Southern California, and that is how we expect the rest of the world to communicate, is it's a tyrannical approach. It is literally tyrannical. You've got 20 or what, I mean, maybe there's 2,000, I don't know, but there's a bunch of people setting up these approaches, and they're trying to impose them on people who use actual English, like me, on people who use other variants, like people in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Australia, New Zealand, and around the rest of the world who do not speak American. And I think there is a fundamental, well, it's a freedom of speech issue that governments don't touch because they say that they don't take the view that they're creating the problem with freedom of speech. Therefore, it's not a constitutional issue. Therefore, it's got nothing to do with them. But it is somebody who is setting up algorithmic analysis based upon the written text, which is incapable of nuance. When you're looking at something that's written, you can't tell whether someone is saying it with irony or with sarcasm or some other form of humor. So the technology is inherently unsuitable for the purpose to which it has been put. And even if it was able to do what they say it's able to do, if it was able to be used in this way, it is still incapable, because it is binary, of making the value judgments that is necessary. So the lack of empathy that machines have because of the very technology upon which they're built is something which is going to cause a problem. So why do I care? It irritates me, but why do I care from a financial services point of view? Because the same technology is being used to identify suspicious transactions and people behaving suspiciously. The criteria are different, but the technology is the same. And so you can end up with people being accused of suspicious activity for no reason except a machine to identify it had not been set up to realize that you may have 50 million borrowers in a country, but they don't all think the same. We cannot expect people to live in tunnels where everyone thinks and says the same things. We cannot expect fraud to always come up following nice little lines. We're told we have to identify fraud, and if we don't identify it and stop it, we've got to compensate the victims. Well, how do we do that when the victims are themselves part of the problem, because they are not using the terminology and other things that we're expecting them to use? The only thing we can do is look at money movements, and if we're looking at money movements, then frankly, yes, they should have identified most of those under the money laundering system. But for some reason, some people or many people decided to leave fraud and money laundering in separate silos within financial institutions. Bad decision, but it's what happened. So the technology which is being used can put people in jail. The only saving grace at that point is going to be if a judge says, I don't accept this. Should we really be leaving something to go through the whole legal system so that a judge can protect an innocent who has been victimized by bad algorithm writing by someone who's sitting in a dark room somewhere else in the world? I think not.
It struck me that could empathy be written into an algorithm? I mean, as you put it, quote, some computer systems have been programmed to identify stress in the voices of those making insurance claims, for example, and to identify tones of voice that identify excessive excitement by dealers who may be giving or receiving insider information. This, I would argue, isn't empathy, but it is identifying factors that empathy identifies. But let's be absolutely clear. This is not the vast majority of software that you and I interact with, end quote. And so that type of regulators and the powers that be and powerful institutions with means have access to such discerning technologies.
Yes, I mean,
but you and I don't get that benefit.
It's been it's been used by insurance companies in the UK, presumably other places too, to identify voice patterns, not speech patterns, not vocabulary, but voice patterns. So it can identify stress. However, I've had a long, hard day today, and I'm listening to my own voice right now and thinking, your voice sounds reedy and thin, and it doesn't sound like your normal, good, sexy, deep voice that people like.
The baritone, Nigel.
Well, it's not the normal baritone today. I can hear it, and it's not nice. And okay, it's better than most people's, but it's still not nice like mine normally is. So I think that what we have is that one of these machines would spot my voice today and say, he's agitated, what's wrong? Well, there's nothing wrong. It's just the machines are programmed to look for this kind of elevated thing. And what about people who speak really fast all the time? Are they inherently risky? So are you going to look at traders who speak really fast all the time and compare that to, I don't know, a journalist who speaks really slowly most of the time? And are we going to say the dealer is more likely to be involved in fraud than the journalist? I don't think so.
Or the dealer he's speaking really fast. Is he on speed? Is he on Ritalin? Is he on cocaine? You know, that's another inference that someone might draw.
Having been in the city in the 1980s, I watching people balance themselves between bottles of wine and visits to the toilet, coming back with sniffing. I can certainly attest to that.
Unreal, man. But yeah, no, but aspersions can get cast, and then if technology is being used, you know, you end up with a red flag next to your name, and as I think you put it in your piece that, and it's not in the vast majority of software that's making decisions that affects lives and livelihoods. Why? Because computers don't care. Because computers can't care. And yeah, that's true. That they're inanimate objects, but we're the people are the ones writing the algorithms. So any deficiency in the algo traces back to the one that wrote it. So
well, yes, I mean that's exactly right, and that's what you said at the beginning, and you're absolutely right. But it doesn't matter how good those algorithms are because the machine still can only do yes and no. So however many yes and no's it's asked for, ultimately it's going to come to something that has to be the ultimate yes or no. And in the article that you're talking about, I say that we interact with the computer, our communication with it is constrained not by our own inabilities to communicate, but by the imagination of the programmer, or just as likely his decision that the chain of questions and answers is long enough, and in any case it's time to go to the pub. We cannot expect that a program will ever, I mean, let's face it, we're talking about software here. We can stop talking about artificial intelligence and all of the fast and loose nomenclature that's added to things. We're talking about a piece of software, and the software ultimately is made of many roots. It's got a root system like that Japanese knotweed thing. It just goes on forever, and sooner or later the programmer reaches the end of his ability. The algorithm designer, who I consider as a programmer, but people try to tell me it's not, they reach the end of their ability to keep thinking about possible questions and answers, because ultimately we are all different, and we reach the end of our understanding and knowledge, and we stop. So unless you've got an enormous team of people with an endless array of backgrounds and cultures and linguistic skills, you're always going to have a very significant compromise in what the software is capable of identifying and asking questions about. And the difficulty you always have is that you can have, if you imagine a family tree, you can have yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, or you can have 35 no's and a yes in a line, but you're still fundamentally coming down to one yes or no at each one of those junctions. And that's what people who think that the technology can do magical things do not understand. It can only reach a decision point, make a yes or no decision, and move on to another decision point. Now, it can do that thousands of times, and it can do that thousands of times in a second, but that's not intelligence. And it's certainly not coming to any kind of decision based upon what the person who did or said something was actually thinking or saying. It cannot go behind what it sees on the screen or what its sensor in terms of the voice stress picks up. Now, when it's talking about voice stress, then what will then happen, what does happen, is somebody listens to it and says, yeah, they're just a bit excited, it's fine, or not. But with the text stuff, the decisions are being made not as exception reports, but they're being made as determinations. And people are not, there are not enough reviews of those systems to say, the computer should not take precipitate action until the decision to take action should be in the hands of humans. So we're seeing the decision making being done by machines which cannot feel, cannot think, and frankly cannot understand because they're not programmed to understand. And I don't think it's possible to program to understand everything. I genuinely think it's not possible. And I know the argument about so-called machine learning. I think that's a fiction. I think machine learning is nothing more than a way that something is, it gathers more information and it treats that information in ways that it has already been told to treat it. Now, those ways can be quite vague, in which case it gives the impression that it's making novel decisions, but it's only doing it because it's not been tightly controlled. And that lack of tight control is a good thing in most cases.
You know, it's funny when people talk about AI, large language models, machine learning. I'm not quite sure that even the techies, even the computer programmers, know what they're talking about. But in your piece, you say, quote, in their own use of language, they design out clarity and design in fuzziness but in their algorithms, they design out any form of empathy as they must, because computers cannot feel, they cannot be empathetic, they cannot respond to the sad faces or tears or fists of someone who has reached the end of their tether. This is where the use of computers is reaching a crossroads, end quote. What are you hinting at? What are you alluding to? Are you pointing to the limits of the technology and the next step, the next evolution upwards? What are you getting at there?
I'm getting at something very simple. Computers should not be allowed to make life-changing decisions.
Which then comes to the circles you and I run in: lawyers, compliance officers, banking and finance types, consultants, investigators. What does it all mean for them?
Well, 90% of what we deal with is a grey area, and computers cannot work out what degree of grey we're talking about. They can only do black and white. So if you're going to give a computer a set of facts and say, come to a judgment, it can do that, but it can only do that provided it's got all of the facts. Who decides if it's got all the facts? Who decides what facts it should have? I mean, we see, if we read the transcripts of police interviews, we often see, but you didn't tell us that. And the person being questioned says, well, I didn't think it was relevant. To which the police will often say something along the lines of, but we decide what's relevant. Well, so what's someone going to do? Sit there and literally play back a recording of their entire life over a period of months and say, you choose.
Precisely, which is why the questions need to be pointed.
Right, but you can't do that. You can't do that with a computer. You can do that in real life. You can do that when you're sitting interviewing somebody, because you can take their response and you can take from that response something that needs to be taken from it and direct a question based upon it, and follow-up questions or parallel questions, all based on that one thing that's been said. But a computer can't do that unless it's already been told, expect that answer, or expect an answer like it, and then ask one of the following questions. And by saying ask one of the following questions, it is already limiting its ability to undertake that investigation.
Well, I mean, going back to when you were a solicitor and doing client intakes, right? That much of what your clients would tell you was inconsequential. It was moot. It wasn't relevant to the matter at hand.
In criminal defense, most of the problem was what my clients didn't tell me.
But you provided that filtering is key.
Exactly. But if you're sitting at your computer at home typing into something on a global technology system, that filter doesn't exist. It's just you and a computer. There's nobody coming between you and the judge to say this. We need to expand upon this. We need to find more detail about this. There's just nobody there to do that. It's just the machine says, I haven't got enough information, or it decides I've got this information. I don't like that word, therefore you're guilty.
So is sociopathy endemic? Is it perpetually endemic to technology, and that's just something we need to acknowledge and accept as we use it?
I don't think it's so. I think that sociopathy is one stage less than it is. I think they are psychopathic. Not the people that program it. I'm not saying that people who program these things are psychopaths. In many cases, they have the best intentions, but they do not understand the scale of what they're doing in terms of, once it gets out into the wild, what it's capable of the scale of the world that it can have an effect on. And they don't understand that if they get one thing wrong, people's lives are in trouble. And I want to plug a book, and it's not mine. It's called Fraud Markers, Debanking and Financial Crime by Jeremy Asher. Seriously, every single person in financial crime should read this book. Every single one. It is about the consequences of systems that are not applied properly, and that something like 200,000 or more people in the UK every year find themselves debanked, unable to get a bank account, and that then affects their ability to get a job. It affects their ability to collect benefits. And it's done because they've done something that somebody who was making a poor decision didn't like. And the type of decisions that are set out in the book are remarkably scary. It can be that somebody withdraws an application before the KYC process is done, and somebody says, well, that's suspicious, and makes a report. It's not suspicious enough to make a report to the FIU, but they say, well, I've got to do something. And the fact is, if people are going to make 5 applications for mortgages, and they're going to take the best provisional offer, and then they're going to abandon 4 of them, well, those 4 companies may well make the decision that because they didn't complete the KYC process, that they were doing something inherently, if not suspicious, certainly questionable. This is not how assessment systems, be they human or mechanized, are supposed to work. But it's what's happening.
In the time we've got left, any closing thoughts, any wisdom, any cautionary notes for the years to come, the way you see such technologies evolving, Nigel?
I think the most important thing is that people working in the government sectors, in financial services and others, should not run before to a future that doesn't exist yet, and may not exist for 5, 10, 15 years or ever. But it certainly does not exist yet. And these, quote, solutions are being dished out by people who do not appreciate the ultimate consequences for hundreds of thousands or millions of people around the world of technology which is designed by people who have a narrow viewpoint, who have their own prejudices, and who are, in many cases, doing little more than pushing their own political or ideological agenda. We should not, as a society, we should not be accepting this. And the guardians of us, that is the rest of society, are the very people that are being told you need this because this is how you protect society. It's a false narrative.
Well, Nigel Morris-Cotterill, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for allowing me to be excitable, a hobby horse, and speak with my reedy voice.
And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.